As an investor, what's scarier? Banks going bust or banks not lending? Well, global regulators seem to have decided they'll run the risk for the time being that banks might go bust in order to get them lending. The move they've made is what I want to cover in this video, and as an investor, I find it a rather unnerving one. So I'm going to be suggesting that if you're in banks and you've seen bank stocks rise in the last few days, you'll want to be out of them fairly quickly again soon, because the latest move by regulators I'm about to explain indicates just how worried they are about banks, the state our banks are in, not just ours, the European and American ones too, and what lengths they're prepared to go to in order to try and get banks to do what they should be doing, which is lending and promoting growth. Okay, so what have they done? Well, the regulators got together a few years ago and decided that they needed to avert a Lehman Bank style collapse. All right, perfectly sensible. They thought we'll come up with a liquidity measure and we'll force it on the banks. So in other words, we'll make the banks hold a rainy day fund, okay? If you like, a cushion against things going wrong. Now, that all sounds perfectly sensible, all right? And they came up with a little formula, right? A little bit of technical stuff coming up, but not too much. They said, as a bank, we'll make you hold a stock of, now I'm going to abbreviate here slightly, okay? High quality liquid assets, stuff you can sell really easily, as a way of covering your total net outflows over the next 30 days. Right, I said we want you to put aside a stock of high quality liquid assets, stuff you could flog really easily, and the amount needs to be at least equal to your total estimated net outflows over the next 30 days. It's a bit like, okay, it's a bit like a father saying to their child, if you like, their free spending child, well, you must have £100 set aside at the start of the month, all right? Because I want you to make sure that you have set to one side at least the amount of your total net outflows over the next 30 days. And I reckon in a typical month, you spend £130 and you get £40 in from your odd Saturday jobs, all right? So you spend 130, that's an outflow, you get £40 in, that's an inflow, okay? So over a month, you spend 90, so I want you to hold 100, which is more than your total outflows of 90, okay? So 100 over 90 would meet the criteria of this funny little test. So applied to banks, it's the idea that they set aside an amount that will cover what their outflows will be over the next 30 days. Why just 30 days? Well, who knows? Doesn't sound like very long to me, but to regulators, that seemed like a way that they could stop banks going bust too quickly in the manner of the kind of Lehman style collapse and in the wake of the kind of credit crisis. Right, that looked to be coming into force, but recently they've changed their minds. They've said, we want to tweak this, okay? Basically, the banks complained and said, this is too harsh, right? This won't enable us having to set aside all this, well, what is it? All this kind of cash, high grade corporate and government securities, high quality liquid assets, having to set those to one side will limit what we can do as banks, okay? If you want to see it this way, imagine, again, going back to my father and son analogy, Dad says, I want you to set aside 150 quid next month, okay, to cover your net outflows. You'd be like, well, that means if I've got to set it aside, I can't spend it. I'm even worse off. The more you ask me to set aside, okay, the less I can actually spend. Or in the case of banks, the more you ask me to set to one side, okay, basically the less I can lend, right? So regulators have come along and done 2 or 3 things to water this down. It's amazing, you know, only what? I mean, our memory is so short, only sort of 5 years ago, we were panicking that the whole banking system might collapse. Now regulators are saying, well, we did have a good way, okay, of making you set aside a rainy day fund, but we're going to water it all down because now we're not panicking so much about banks going bust, we're panicking more about whether you can actually do any lending and get the global economy stimulated. In other words, we're worried even more about the economy just kind of collapsing in on itself, and banks are a central part of keeping the economy afloat. so say central bankers, okay, through their lending activities and so on. So what they've done is this. They've said, first of all, we will widen what you can set aside. In other words, we will loosen the test. So high quality liquid assets, to you or me, might sound like stuff that can be easily sold, stuff that doesn't change its value too quickly. But now they've opened the floodgates and said, in addition to the high grade stuff that we mentioned before, that you should be holding to cover your net outflows for the next 30 days, we'll chuck in stuff that's frankly much, much riskier. Okay, so we'll let you throw in there mortgage-backed securities, lower grade corporate bonds. In other words, the pool of assets you're claiming you've got set to one side can include all kinds of sort of more rubbishy stuff that we weren't going to let in before. All right, so we've loosened the criteria as what counts as a stock of high quality liquid assets. Right, there's relaxation number one. Number two, they've said, rather than force you to comply with this by the 1st of January 2015, we're going to give you lots more time. Okay, so as long as you can come up with sort of, you know, an answer of 60% or better by the 1st of January 2015, we'll be happy. And then if you can edge up in 10% increments up to 2019 to the full 100%, we'll be happy. Okay, so not only have regulators said, basically we're loosening our criteria in terms of what is an HQLA. Secondly, they've said you can have a lot more time to achieve your target. And thirdly, they've said we're not too bothered about you having a stock of HQLA that covers these in a time of financial stress. So if things go really pear-shaped, okay, and you think there's kind of a shortage of high-quality assets around you can get hold of quickly to demonstrate you passed the test, don't bother. And that was a concession made directly to some of the European banks who, frankly, are in a pretty battered state and probably in no position to meet a test like this. So what does all that tell you? Okay, don't worry too much about the technical content, and I have shortcut a lot of it in this video. What does that actually all mean? Well, what it says is where, you know, where I started at the beginning of this video. Regulators set off with this quite hard test, saying this is the way we stop banks hitting a sudden liquidity or cash flow crisis, Lehman style. But actually, these days, those fears have been overtaken by a larger one, which is that banks over the next few years will slow lending down, global growth will grind to a halt. So as an investor, how do I interpret this? I mean, regulatory stuff isn't, you know, desperately exciting, so what do I do with all this information? Well, frankly, if I was holding bank shares, and I was looking back over the last few days and seeing bank shares tick up, because they've ticked up, by the way, because in the short term, relaxing this test does enable banks to make short term a little bit more profit. Okay? But looking out medium to longer term, I would say regulators are pretty darn nervous about the banking sector and its role in the wider global economy, and that's bad news both for banks, and medium to long term could also be bad news for the wider stock market too. And just before I go, there's now an even easier way to get my videos delivered by email straight to your inbox, and before everybody else receives them. Just click on the link below for more details. To download this free video to your favourite mobile device, find us on iTunes by searching for MoneyWeek. And the entire video archive is also available free. Just visit moneyweek.com.